Okay. Okay, as I said at the end of the last video, today I want to show you all the books that I read in this year, which if you watched my stats video, you know is 33 books. So all 33 books I want to show you and like tell you briefly what it's about and like how much I liked it. I'll give you a star rating for each one. Now, if you watched my stats video, then you also know that a lot of the books I read this year were Wheel of Time books. 13 out of the 33 books that I read were from the Wheel of Time series. So it doesn't really make sense to talk about each of those books individually, at least without spoilers, because I don't want to be spoiling you guys in this video. So I'm going to start with like the whole of the Wheel of Time and show you all of those books and like talk about the Wheel of Time a little bit generally, and then I will move into going like month by month each book that I read that wasn't the Wheel of Time. So if you're not at all interested in hearing about the Wheel of Time, you could not care less about that series, then I will put a timestamp on the screen and you can skip to that time and just completely skip all the Wheel of Time stuff. Now that those people who don't care about the Wheel of Time have left, I would like to talk about the Wheel of Time and show you all the books that I read in that series. So in the Wheel of Time series, I read the first book, which is The Eye of the World, which I gave 4 stars. Then I also read the second book, which is The Great Hunt, which I also gave 4 stars. Then I read the third book, The Dragon Reborn, which I also gave 4 stars. Then I read the fourth book in the Wheel of Time, The Shadow Rising, which I also gave 4 stars. Then I read the 5th book of the Wheel of Time, The Fires of Heaven, which I also gave 4 stars. Now, after that, I mixed it up and read the prequel, New Spring, which I also gave 4 stars. Then I read the 6th book, Lord of Chaos, which I gave 3 stars. Then I read the 7th book, A Crown of Swords, which I also gave 4 stars. Then I read book 8, The Path of Daggers, which I gave 3 stars. Then I read book 9, Winter's Heart, which I also gave 3 stars. Then I read book 10, Crossroads of Twilight, which I gave 2 stars. Then I read book 11, Knife of Dreams, which I gave 4.5 stars. And finally, I read book 12, The Gathering Storm, which I also gave 4.5 stars. And I am currently reading book 13, Towers of Midnight. I'm about 750 pages through this 1200 behemoth. As you saw, I mostly gave them 4 stars, with a few 3 stars, a couple of 4.5 stars, and 1 2-star. That one is the dud. So on average, I've given the series so far a 3.7. So, you know, not quite a 4, which for me means like good, really good book. So not quite there. It's been a little bit uneven, but generally it's a series that I've been enjoying. And it's hard for me to talk about it in a way. I mean, it's hard to talk about such a giant series, right? Now, you don't know about the Wheel of Time, so maybe I should actually like tell you what the Wheel of Time is before I like start talking about how I feel about it. The Wheel of Time is an epic, high fantasy, adult series. It started being published right at the beginning of the 90s, and I believe the last book was published sometimes in the mid 2010s, something like that. It's like a very classic high fantasy. Like the first book especially really draws on Tolkien, and it's like small village, real cutesy, like outsiders come in, there's danger, they have to run away, you know, it's very reminiscent of the beginning of Lord of the Rings in that way. And, you know, dark creatures, you know, all that. So it's very familiar if you've read a lot of fantasy. But it really takes off from there. Like at the point where I'm at, I definitely wouldn't call it like anything really close to the Lord of the Rings, except that there's like a big evil bad guy that you have to defeat. And besides that, it doesn't really remind me of Lord of the Rings anymore. And it's really become its own thing. It's super vast, like there's so much to it. It's such a big world, so many like distinct cultures and like different cool places, because we get to go to a lot of places and see a lot of places. And some of them are just like super duper cool. There's a lot of depth to it. I'm super excited to finish the series. I have to say, like, I started reading The Wheel of Time because It's one of my boyfriend's like absolute favorite series. And so I wanted to read it to like fully understand like how he feels about it and like what the big thing is for him. Like I wanted to be able to talk to him about it, and now that there's a TV series coming out, I want to be able to watch that with him and like have full-on spoiler-filled discussions, you know? And I'm really excited about that. And the show looks super cool. Like I'm getting really excited about it. So I really started it because of him. It wasn't something that I decided to pick up on my own. And so it was kind of, it was hard for me to connect to it in a way in the beginning. It didn't feel like it was like my thing, you know? It's a little hard to describe, but it didn't really feel like it was full on my thing. And it wasn't really until like after the slog. Sorry, there was an alarm on my phone that rudely interrupted my recording. So if it looks a little bit wrong or a little bit different, I'm sorry. Anyway, really, the slog for me was book 6, 8, 9, and 10. I like book 7. Book 7 I thought was definitely better than book 6. You know, most people say the slog is like book 7 or 8 through 10, but for me it was a little bit different. It was 6, not 7, 8, 9, 10. And 10 was definitely the worst. It wasn't really until after the slog when I'd like gotten my way through that. And the books right after the slog, book 11 and book 12, have been my favorites so far of the whole series. It wasn't really until that point that I really felt like, okay, this is my thing too. Because I was reading it thinking like, okay, this is my boyfriend's thing, I'm reading it for him. And it really wasn't until I read like book 11 and 12 that I was like, wow, this is my thing too. And I started getting like more attached to the characters. And that sounds crazy, like, okay, you read 10 books and you didn't even like care, you didn't even like the characters. And I'm like, that's not what was happening. Like I did care, like I was intrigued and I was invested, but it really wasn't until after the slog that I was like, wow, like this, like I'm really into it now. And now I'm so nervous because I'm over halfway through the second to last book, and like the last battle is really like looming, and you know it's gonna be this giant thing, and like it's so high stakes, and I'm hoping that people that I love are gonna die. I'm assuming they will, and that's gonna hurt me, and I'm gonna cry, and it's gonna be like, it's gonna be so epic, and I'm not ready. It's getting so close. Like I've come so far and it's getting so close, and I'm so nervous. But this is really rambly and random. I've seen a lot of booktubers say that like, oh, in 2021, I really want to start getting into the Wheel of Time. And I'm like, finally something that I'm ahead of the curve on. So I'm really excited to see more people reading it. And I want to hear like what people have to say about it. I think that's going to be really cool. And I'm really excited about the TV show and what people are going to say about that. And like, it's going to be a whole thing. And I'm excited. I'm really excited. I don't know if I can recommend to people to read the Wheel of Time, because like, you really have to love high fantasy. I have to say, it's not an entry point series. I don't think anyone should read it as like their entry to high fantasy. But if you already like high fantasy and you read high fantasy, then give it a try. Like, I know some people are not gonna like it. There are some things in there that I don't love. And you know, the slog is kind of rough, given that it's like 4 books that are like, kind of iffy. But for me, like being at the point where I'm at now, I cannot say that I would ever regret having read it, even though there are parts of it that I don't love, and there are, you know, the slog and all that. People say that the ending is supposed to be really good. So I'm looking forward to it. I'm looking forward to being able to watch every video that's made about it and like read all the Reddit threads and everything, because nothing will spoil me anymore because I'll know it all. I'm gonna be finishing the series out in the beginning of this year of 2021. I have a goal that I want to finish the whole series in less than a year, and I've started the first book on February 23rd, 2020. So I want to be sure to finish the last book before February 23rd. And I should be able to do that. That should be doable. I mean, they're big books. I'm gonna make a true effort to make sure to get that done. But I'm starting my master's thesis very soon, so, but I have faith in myself. I really want to be able to say that I read it in less than a year. But now I want to move on and talk about the other 20 books that I read. And I'm going to go in order of when I read them. So the first book that I finished in 2020 was The Ring of Solomon by Jonathan Stroud. And you already know this if you watched my stats video. I'm sorry, there's going to be some overlap with this video. And so this is the prequel to the Bartimaeus trilogy. And the Bartimaeus trilogy follows Bartimaeus, who's a jinn or a demon, and Nathaniel, who is, I think he's 12 in the first book, 12-year-old magician's apprentice, because it's a fantasy series and it's kind of like alternative our world, like it's our world, but if there was magic, and of course that's made the world a very different place than how it is now. I'm not sure if it's completely current day, but they do have like cars and stuff, but not in this one. This is the prequel. It follows Bartimaeus like thousands of years before, when he's stuck working for King Solomon in Jerusalem. So it's about Bartimaeus, who's working, a dead-end job, being summoned by a magician who works for King Solomon. And it also follows a girl named Smira. I don't know exactly how old she is, I don't remember. I think she's like in her late teens, maybe like 18, 19, maybe, if I would guess. And she is from kind of a neighboring country. She's a guard of the palace, and she's sent to assassinate King Solomon because he's a big threat in the region and they want him gone. And so that's what it's about. It's a dual perspective between Bartimaeus and Smira primarily. And I really enjoyed it. I love the Bartimaeus trilogy. I didn't necessarily enjoy this quite as much, but I still gave it 4 stars and I thought it was super enjoyable. Now, the next book that I finished, also in January, was Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte, which I also gave 4 stars. But it was a bit strange for me. Like, I didn't quite know what to do with this book. I think I expected the wrong thing. I think I went in expecting like a tragic love story, which in a way, I mean, I guess it is, but every person in this book is awful, honestly. Like, varying degrees of awful. They're all rat bastards, or like they're all awful people, especially like Heathcliff. Heathcliff is incredibly abusive and horrible. So I was reading it thinking like, what the fuck, is this supposed to be a romantic story? Like, he's supposed to be my romantic hero? And I thought he was awful. And so, I don't know, I talked to my mom about it, and she said that, well, it's just probably because we don't think the same things are romantic now as people did back then. It's hard for me to accept that, like, oh, it's just because it's old, so you don't think it's romantic. Because I've thought things from that era were romantic before, so I'm like, nah. But maybe that's not what it's supposed to be read as. I've heard some people say like, oh, don't think of it as a love story, think of it as just a tragedy. Like, there's nothing romantic about it. And I can agree with that a lot more, but I don't know if that's actually what it's supposed to be. I enjoyed it, but I didn't really know what to do with it. Like, it was hard for me to deal with. Now we're moving into February, and the first book that I finished in February was True Women, a Novel of Texas by Janice Woods Windle. Now, this is not at all a well-known book, it seems, but I love it. I gave it 5 stars. I've read it before. This was a reread. I was first introduced to this story because there's like a mini-series that I watched as like a tween, and I loved. I was obsessed with it. I would keep rewatching it. And so I found out it was a book originally, so I got the book and read it. Now, I don't know if I would love the book quite as much if I didn't already like know the characters and love the characters. It's very like Texas, tough women who know how to shoot, know how to ride like a man. Like, I can't do a Texas accent. You know I can't. It follows 3 different women. It's supposed to be like the ancestors to the author. I don't know how accurate it is, like how much like this is based on like her family research, but that's what it's supposed to be. I thought it was really fun. I realized a lot of people probably think this is boring. I saw some reviews on Goodreads that were like, this reads like a history textbook, it's super boring. I do not agree. I think it's thrilling, but everyone's got their preferences. And I like tough Texas women. And now, the second book that I finished in February was The Chrysanthemum and the Sword by Ruth Benedict, Patterns of Japanese Culture. And this is a classic work of anthropology. You could say that my minor when I got my bachelor's degree is in anthropology, so I really love that kind of stuff. This is a book that we talked a lot about in class, but we never read it for class. So I bought it way back then. I finally read it this year, and it was very interesting. If you don't know anything about anthropology and you've never read a work of anthropology, I don't know if you would really get into this. It's not a nonfiction that's really written to be like enjoyable for the general public, so you shouldn't really think of it that way. But if you're really interested in like anthropology, this was written during the Second World War. She was like asked by the government to like make a study about Japanese culture so that they could better understand the Japanese people and therefore better defeat them in the Second World War. And so it's a really interesting backstory, and that's really why I picked it up. And obviously, normally with anthropological studies, you would go to the place and really like immerse yourself in the culture. She couldn't do that, obviously, because they were at war with Japan. So she had to do it completely based on like Japanese cultural productions, like books, movies, whatever, and interviews with Japanese Americans. So people have criticized this as maybe not the most accurate. I can't speak to that. And there were some really interesting things in here, and some of the concepts were really advanced, or like, especially for me who's not used to studying anthropology anymore, I had to really pay attention to some of the like concepts that she introduced and stuff. But I thought it was really interesting. Couldn't really recommend it to most people though. Now there's a big jump because between from February on, for some months, I didn't read anything besides Wheel of Time. So the next non-Wheel of Time book that I read actually finished in July. And the first book that I finished in July was Kim Jiyoung, born 1982, by Cho Nam Joo. And this is a Korean book. It's written in Korean originally. This is the translated version, obviously. And it's like a feminist contemporary, I guess, literary fiction maybe. And it's all like feminist rage, I guess. Kim Jiyoung is like the most common Korean girl's name of this generation, born in 1982. And it's just recounting like her life from childhood and like through getting married, being a teenager, all that kind of stuff, and all the injustices she faces because she's a woman in Korea. I know this book made a huge splash in Korea when it came out, big bestseller, a lot of male rage about it, not very appreciated, which love that. So I really wanted to read it. My mom gave it to me over the summer, just spontaneously. She just bought it and thought I would like it. And I really did. Oh, I forgot to say, I gave the Chrysanthemum and the Sword 4 stars. Did I say that? I don't think so, but I did. I gave this one 5 stars. I thought it was awesome. Like I thought it was a little dry for a lot of it because it's really just recounting, like, this is what happened, this is what happened. There's not a lot of feelings. Obviously, you know what the feeling is. The feeling is, what the fuck? This is not okay, but doesn't really say it. But then, like, the very last chapter, it's about this woman, right? And she starts, because of all the injustice she's faced being a woman, she basically snaps and she starts hallucinating, or like, she starts speaking as if she was her mother, or as if she was her grandmother. She's just like speaking with the voice of women who came before. And so she's sent to a psychiatrist, right? And so the last chapter is, I believe, from the psychiatrist's point of view, who's a man. And the last line, like his take on the whole thing, I'm like, I was so mad. I wanted to scream. And so obviously that made me love the book even more, because, you know, it's supposed to make you mad, right? And like, it just says, like, on the back here, like, Kim Jiyoung is a daughter whose father blames her when she's harassed late at night. Kim Jiyoung is a model employee who gets overlooked for a promotion. Kim Jiyoung is a wife who gives up her career and independence for a life of domesticity, etc. I think for Korean women, this was probably super relatable, and they were like, holy shit, this is my life, and I hate it. Like, it's so unfair. For me, I can't quite relate. Sweden is at a very different point in its feminist journey than Korea is. But I was still mad. I was still mad. I was like, damn, some things still suck. Great book though, great book. The next book that I finished in July, I don't have with me, but it's a Swedish book called Hjältar på Himlavalvet, or Heroes and Monsters of the Heavens. I mentioned it in my stats video as well. And so I gave it 5 stars. I love it. It's like a children's version of the Greek myths. So I love the Greek myths. I was raised on the Greek myths primarily through this very book. And so it was a great time reading it. Obviously, most of you probably can't read it because you probably can't read Swedish. But if you can read Swedish and you think the Greek myths are fun and you want to read like a children's version of them because it's cozy or whatever, then yeah, go ahead. But I'm not going to talk a lot about it here. Next book that I finished in July as well was The New Silk Roads, The Present and Future of the World by Peter Frankopan. Now, I mentioned this in my stats video as well because it was the lowest rated book that I read this year. I gave it 3 stars. So I didn't hate it. I thought it was all right. I thought parts of it were kind of bad. I thought it was not superbly written and not very well edited. Like there were like typos in here, and there was one time when they're like the exact same paragraph like came twice, and I was like it didn't feel like it had been properly like looked over before it was like made into a book. Parts of it felt like he was just like telling you all these things, like this thing happened in China, this thing happened in the Middle East, this thing happened in Russia, just like going on and on and on without ever like tying it all together and like connecting it. It was like he was just giving you lots of different factoids, showing you how important the like Silk Road region is in current day like politics and economics. And like, yeah, some of them were interesting, but after a while you were like, okay, but like tie it all together, like make an argument out of it. So I was a little annoyed at parts of it. I was like, come on, like I didn't need that many examples to like make me understand that things are happening outside of Europe and the US. Which maybe, I don't know if maybe I was just not the audience. Maybe this is written for like Americans who pay no attention to the rest of the world. Maybe, I don't know how large that group would be. But for me, I'm like, yeah, I'm aware that China is important on the world stage. Like, I'm not completely clueless. So I don't know, he didn't really take it to a level that I would have wanted. There were some interesting things in here, but not quite what I wanted. But 3 stars, it was okay. The last book that I finished in July, which I showed in my stats video again because it was the shortest book I read this year, is this one. Sagan om Alice I Verkligheten by Christina, Björk and Inga-Karin Eriksson. And so it's a children's nonfiction about Lewis Carroll and the real Alice that inspired Alice in Wonderland. And this is a book that I've had for many, many years, for like, I don't know, 15 years or something. And I think it's beautiful. It's got these lovely illustrations in it. Like, look, it's so cute. It's so cute. And so I love it. It's in Swedish, obviously, so most of you probably can't read it, but it was a great experience for me just reading through it again. But I gave it 4 stars. I didn't give it 5. I don't love it quite that much, but 4 stars. Still very good. Now we move into August, and the first non-Wheel of Time book that I finished in August was Dear Leader, From Trusted Insider to Enemy of the State, My Escape from North Korea by Jang Song. I've never read a North Korean escape book before. I know that there are quite a lot. I saw some reviews saying that like this is quite similar. Like once he makes it out of North Korea, it's very similar to most other North Korean escape books. I can't speak to that, but for me it was a great experience. I gave it 5 stars. It's a nonfiction, but it made me cry. You know, there was some stuff that happened in this over the course of his escape that just, it hurts, especially knowing that it's real, right? And I saw some reviews saying that they thought it was like too flowery written, like it seemed like almost too poetic. I think that's a language thing. I don't speak Korean, but I have a lot of experience with translated Korean, and the phrasings to me seemed quite familiar. So I think that might be, if you're not very used to Korean and translated Korean, then you might think this is a little strange. I don't know. It didn't bother me at all. The interesting thing about this book is, I don't know if this is true, but the feeling that I've gotten is that most like North Korean escape stories are by people who really had it horrible in North Korea, like who were in prison camps, who lived in poverty. And that was not this dude's experience. He was like from the North Korean elite. Like he worked in the government, he had this really privileged job where he got to see like a lot of stuff from the outside, and he really had a lot more knowledge about the outside than most North Koreans. And there's this horrible scene where he like goes back to his like original hometown that he left like when he was like a little kid, and visits his like childhood best friend and sees like how people have it there. And it was horrible. It was horrible. Like the family that he goes to visit, they've like saved up a bunch of rice so that they could give him like half a bowl of rice because he's a guest. Just talking about it like makes me want to cry again. It was so sad. And just knowing that people have it like this is not a novel, right? This is a nonfiction. It's a horrible, horrible thing. And if you want to learn a little bit more about it, I thought this book was very good. Now, continuing in August, I'm gonna hold up a book that I already showed in my stats video because it was my favorite book of the year. So 5 stars, obviously. and that is Daisy Jones and the Six by Taylor Jenkins Reid. It's a historical fiction set in like the late 60s, early 70s, and it's about Daisy Jones, who's this singer, and the Six, which is a band, and how they team up and make amazing music. But they were supposed to have been like the best band of the time, like the biggest band of the time. And Daisy Jones is the it girl of the 70s, like the coolest girl there is. And it's written in this like interview transcript format, so it's a very fast read. And I really enjoyed it. I loved the way it was written. I thought it was very pleasant to read. It's a lot of fun, obviously, but it's a lot deeper than maybe you would assume. Maybe you'd think like, okay, so it's about a rock band, it's just like fun. But it's quite heavy. It deals quite a lot with topics of addiction, especially, because obviously this is the sex, drugs, and rock and roll era. So drugs and alcohol and issues with that quite heavily feature in this book, which I didn't really expect. I didn't think it was gonna go there. But I thought it packed like a lot more of an emotional punch than maybe I expected. And I thought it was really good. I thought it was really, really good. I don't know what else to say about it, but I thought it was absolutely lovely. Obviously 5 stars, my favorite book of the year. Now we're moving into September. And the next book that I have is Gone Girl by Gillian, Flynn. And I think most of you are quite aware of this book. I had actually seen the movie before reading the book, so the big twist, which I'm not going to tell you about, it's a thriller, obviously there's a twist. I was already well familiar with that, so I can't really speak to what the experience would be like reading this if you haven't seen the movie. I have a feeling that maybe I would have figured out the twist, even if I didn't know, but it's impossible to say, obviously, because I knew the twist going in. But even knowing the twist, I thought it was very interesting. Should I describe it? I feel like most people would know what it's about, but it's a married couple and the wife suddenly disappears on their wedding anniversary. And everybody thinks that the husband did it, basically. And things go from there. I don't really know how to describe a thriller, like without spoiling anything. I don't know, like the interesting part is the part you can't tell people, right? I thought it was a lot of fun. I gave it a four stars. I didn't love it, but I thought it was a very good experience. I'm not a well-read thriller reader. I really haven't read like pretty much any thrillers, so I can't really compare it to anything. I don't know if it's a good thriller or a mediocre thriller, but it's a very famous thriller. So if you are interested in thrillers and you don't know the twist, if you haven't seen the movie maybe, then I think this would be a good place to start. It was very accessible to me. Also in September, I read Crazy Rich Asians by Kevin Kwan. And this I read because I watched the movie this year, or last year in 2020, and I loved it. So I figured I should maybe read the book because clearly I was into it. And I did, and I don't know, I'm not a romance reader. This is the only romance book that I read this year. So it's hard for me to say. It was very light. It was kind of like watching the movie in that it was, you know, it was light, it was fun, it was cute, it was fluffy, it was kind of outrageous. Obviously the crazy rich people are a little crazy. It was fun. I didn't enjoy it as much as I enjoyed the movie. I thought it was longer than it maybe needed to be with the subject matter. I feel like you could have gotten it together faster and snappier, you know? I didn't mind it. I gave it 3 stars. I thought it was kind of mediocre, but like fairly fun. I'm thinking I'll probably continue on with the next book in the series, which is called China Rich Girlfriend. I feel like I have to be in the right mood. Maybe I should like save it for summer or something as like a beach read, maybe. But yeah, fairly fun. Now we move into October. The first non-Wheel of Time book that I read in October was Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire, which is the first book in the Wayward Children series. And basically the premise is that there's this school for teenagers who have gone through like a magical portal, who have gone to a different world, and then come back, and they're struggling to reintegrate into society. They're struggling with getting used to being back home. So we follow a girl named Nancy, mainly, as she arrives at the school, and she desperately wants to go back to her original world. She doesn't want to be in the world, in our world. And then there's this mystery. Something happens at the school, and it kind of flips everything on its head. And obviously, because Nancy just arrived, people are thinking she's the one who did it, like she's the one who did something bad, because nobody knows her, right? She's the new one. Like nothing happened before she got here, right? And so there's this whole thing, and I thought it was a lot of fun. It gets quite dark, like the actual like mystery that happens, it's quite gruesome. Like I didn't think it was gonna be that, you know, visceral. Quite vivid descriptions there. I really loved all like the different children. They talk about the worlds that they went to, or the teenagers, I guess, the teenagers. They talk about like all the different worlds they went to, and like they compare worlds and like what's different, and they have this whole classification system about like what kind of world you went to. And I am a sucker for like classification and order, so I really enjoyed that part. And yeah, it was just really fun. I know this is a very popular series on BookTube, so I'm sure you've heard about it before, but I gave it a 4.5. I didn't quite feel like I could give it a 5, but I was pretty close, so 4.5. And it's very short, right? It's less than 200 pages, and I'm really not used to that. I'm really not used to, you know, shorter books. I think that was kind of what held me back from being able to give it a 5, is that I still felt like it was build up for most of the book, right? And then it just ended. It felt a little short to me. I don't know if it was because of the way it was written, or if it's just because I'm not used to reading short books. Now, the second book that I finished in October was And Then There Were None by Agatha Christie, which is a classic mystery. Now, I've never read any Agatha Christie before, so this is really my first foray into that. The premise is that there are 10 strangers who in different ways are kind of lured to this remote mansion on an island. And then nobody's there, and they're having dinner, and somebody dies. Mysteriously. Nobody knows why they died. And then one by one, they start dying. And there's like a nursery rhyme that connects to it. Each person dies according to the nursery rhyme, so that's kind of creepy. It was a wild ride. It's a short book, like 250 pages. It was a lot of fun. I definitely want to read more Agatha Christie. This was a great introduction. And I know it's a super, super famous book, but I'd never heard of it, so I didn't know anything about the plot or anything. Now, I really liked it. I gave it 5 stars. It was definitely one of my favorite books of the year. And now we're moving into November, and I actually only finished one book that wasn't Wheel of Time in November, and that was Leviathan Wakes by James S.A. Corey. This is the first book in the Expanse series, which is like a large epic sci-fi series. On the front it says, as close as you'll get to a Hollywood blockbuster in book 4. And honestly, I agree. It was super cinematic. Watching, like reading it, you're like, whoa. Like you can see it. I know it's a TV series too. I don't know if I can start the TV series having only read the first book, so I think I'm gonna try and read at least more of the books, like some more of the books before I jump into the TV series, because I really don't want the TV series to spoil the books for me. But I'm sure that the TV series could be awesome just based on the material that's in the book. It went in directions that I really didn't expect. It got a lot weirder and a lot grosser and a lot more like horror-y than I expected. I expected it just being like, you know, spaceships, pew pew, shooting, space battles. And there were some of that too, but I got a lot more gross, like body horror-y that I ever expected from it. So if you like that kind of stuff, you know, try it out. I'm really not a sci-fi reader. This is the only sci-fi that I read this year, but it definitely opened my eyes to some new possibilities. It took me a little while to get into the like space lingo. Oh well, you get into it. You get into it, and it doesn't get that, it's not that hard. This is not a super difficult book to get through. Let's just say that. Now we're moving into December, and the first book that I finished in December, but that I actually started reading in August, was The Complete Fairy Tales by Brothers Grimm. So these are all the fairy tales that the Brothers Grimm ever published. So we got the classics, you know, Sleeping Beauty, etc. The absolute majority of the stories I'd never heard of before in any form, because there's like 280 stories in this book, and obviously not all of them have become, you know, classics in quite that way. I don't know, like I read this book over quite a lot of time, over almost 4 months. So I read like 2 or 3 fairy tales a day over most of that time. I don't know, like some of the stories I really liked. It was fun seeing like the original versions of fairy tales that you know well, but there were quite a few fairy tales in here that I was just like, about. And a lot of the fairy tales were quite similar. and that made it a little boring. There were some fairy tales that were almost identical with like a small difference. And that was kind of like deja vu-y weird. You were like reading it being like, what? Didn't I read this before? Like, didn't I already read this? And there were so many, so you kind of got them mixed up. Like, I couldn't tell you like what my favorite fairy tale was in this book, because I really don't remember. There were too many, and like some of them were too similar, and you know. But if you really like fairy tales, then absolutely you could pick this up and read through it. I don't know if I really like fairy tales all that much. Like, I don't know. I gave it a 3.5. It's very difficult to rate it. It was better than mediocre, but it wasn't like a 4. I'm not hankering to pick up another like complete fairy tale edition. Like, I don't. No. I feel quite satisfied with this for quite a while. The next book that I read in December, that I also mentioned in my stats video, was Wolf Hall by Hilary Mantel. This is a historical fiction, but it's historical. It follows history closely. And it's about Thomas Cromwell, who was a very important person in the court of Henry VIII in England. Now, I'm a big fan of the Tudor era and the Wars of the Roses. Thomas Cromwell is a super interesting person in history. So it was interesting to read this, and I was hoping I was gonna love it. I went into it thinking, okay, new favorite series. And that's not what happened. I gave it a 3.5. I thought it was better than mediocre, but it was like, well, I don't know. Like, I didn't really know how to feel about it. The writing style is quite intense. It's definitely not an easy breeze through it kind of read. I would definitely say that if you don't know anything about this time in history, if you don't know anything about the people in here, you're gonna be confused. You're gonna be horribly confused. For me, it wasn't really a problem because I already know. Like, I know who Thomas Cromwell is. I knew who the Seymours are. I know who the Boleyns are. Who, Wolsey is. I know who all these people are, right? And for me, it wasn't a problem. But if you don't know these people, you're gonna be confused, honestly. It was kind of almost stream of consciousness, but not really. But you had to really like just flow with the book, which sometimes I couldn't really do, and then I really got stuck. But when I could flow, it really did flow. So I think this is a very well-crafted book, but it wasn't the perfect book for me. Let's say that. So a 3.5. I think I'll continue on with the series, but I'm not hankering to get to the next book. Next book that I finished in December was Down Among the Sticks and Bones, also by Shauna McGuire. This is the second book in the Wayward Children series, and it's kind of a prequel. It follows two of the characters that we meet at the school in the first book, but this is following them when they first went to their magical world and like what happened to them there. It's a little bit of a strange occurrence because their story is told almost entirely in the first book. One of the characters tells another one of the characters like what happened to them. So this book is really spoiled by the first book. If you read this book first, which I've seen at least one booktuber recommend, then I feel like that would really quite ruin parts of the first book. So I'm like, I can't recommend that you read this one first. But I mean, you could, I guess. What I would recommend is what I did, is that you read the first one first, and then you wait a while before you pick up this one. I waited maybe 2 months. I probably could have waited a little bit more so that you don't remember like every detail from the first book. Like however long you need for that. I know for some people they forget stuff immediately. Some people never forget stuff. Make sure that it's not super clear in your head. Like don't go like back to back with these first two books, I don't think. So I would recommend like waiting a little bit. And that's what I did. So I didn't fully remember what was going to happen in this book, and I didn't remember the ending especially, which I think is the most important. So that worked out for me. And I did enjoy this book. I gave it 4 stars, so I liked it a little bit less than the first book, which I gave 4.5. This world is super interesting, and I really like how she writes them. I think it's really funny in ways, but also like really aesthetically pleasing. Aesthetic seems weird because it's just words on a page, but I really like how she writes these books. I'm definitely going to continue on with this series. I did like this. It's very dark. The world that they go to, it's definitely not like a Narnia. This is a dark world. Like we're following twins in this book. One of the girls goes to live with a vampire lord, and the other one lives with and works for like a mad scientist. So it's kind of dark, kind of, you know, bloody. I didn't think it was quite as dark as the first one, which seems strange somehow. It seems like this should be the darker one, but maybe it was just because I was more prepared for it, because I was really surprised by how dark the first book got, and with this one I knew what the tone of the series was, so I wasn't as surprised anymore. But yeah, 4 stars. Now we're on the second to last book. We can make it. This is getting way too long. The second to last book is The 100,000 Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin, which is book 1 of the Inheritance trilogy. Now, as you can see by this very beat up copy, I have read this book before. I bought it and read it when I was like 15, 16, so I had read it, but I really couldn't remember very much at all. I remembered one scene that if you've read this book, I think you know the scene, but I really didn't remember, especially the ending. I didn't remember the ending at all. But I really want to continue on with this trilogy, so I needed to reread this first book. It's a high fantasy, and we follow this girl whose name is Janie. Okay, I gotta cut off again. I got too many alarms, they cut me off. Okay, anyway, we follow this girl in this book that is called Janie, and she is like a leader from a faraway land. She's 19, I think. And then she's called to this central city, which is called Sky. And it's a city on the ground, and then there's a castle that's like floating almost over the city. And up there is where the ruling family of this world lives. Her mother came from that family and ran away. So Janie's called back, and she's named one of the heirs to the throne. There are several heirs, and they're all supposed to basically fight it out to see who actually gets the throne. And so that's kind of a whole thing. But then there are also basically captive gods. They're like captive in human form, and they walk around in the palace, and they're like the source of this ruling family's power. And I love that. I thought that was super cool. Gods are just cool. Like whenever gods are involved, I'm always intrigued. There's a romance / erotic aspect to this book, which I go back and forth on. Sometimes I'm like, that was kind of unnecessary, but it's not actually unnecessary. It actually kind of has to be in there. But whenever I'm reading those parts, I'm like, why are we doing this? Like, what is going on here? Maybe that's just because I'm not really a erotic or romance reader, so I'm not really used to it, I guess, maybe. I don't know, but I really like the book. I think it's cool. I think the world is really cool. I gave it a 4. So it was good, it was very good. And I'm excited to continue on with the series. I know that like each book in the trilogy like follows a different main character, which I'm fully okay with. I never really fell in love with Janie, so I'm actually excited to see who the new main character will be. And I would like to continue on with this series in not too long. Now, okay, the very last book that I finished of this year was Bob by Wendy Mass and Rebecca Stead. And now this, I read it in Swedish first, maybe I should say that. I borrowed it from my mom and she happened to have the Swedish translation, but I don't think it made a big difference to my enjoyment of this book. But it's a middle grade fantasy, and it's about this little girl, she's 11, I believe, who's visiting her grandmother in Australia. She lives in the United States, but her grandmother lives in Australia, and she's visiting for the first time since she was like 5 years old. She doesn't really remember much, like barely anything. But when she gets there, there's this little creature, or like the size of a toddler, basically, a little green creature who's waiting for her in her closet, who's been waiting for her since she was there the last time. And his name is Bob. And it's incredibly sweet, and they try to like figure out everything like that happened last time, and like who Bob is and where he belongs, that he wants to like find his home again. And so they're trying to figure that out. And it's short, it's like 200 pages long, and you know, written for children, so it's a big font. And it's incredibly sweet. The illustrations are super cute, and it warms your heart. You know, it was a very cute way for me to end the year. I read it all in one day, and I was just feeling giddy and happy and cute while reading it. So I gave it 4.5 to 5 stars. Like, somehow I didn't feel right quite to give it 5 stars, maybe just because it's a middle grade. I was like, it's not perfect for me, because obviously it's written for kids, right? But at least a 4.5, maybe a 5. Count it as a 4.5 in my stats, but could be a 5, honestly. Super cute. Okay, so that's all the books. This took super long, again, as did the stats video. I'll see how much I can edit out. But I hope you enjoyed. I feel like I was super rambly and unorganized today, so I'm sorry about that. I hope you at least got some enjoyment out of it. If you've read any of these books, please do share. Please tell me what you thought of them. And if you haven't read them, but now you're interested in reading one of them, please also tell me that. I think the next video that I'll be posting is either my 2021 project TBR or it's my 2021 goals. I can't remember. It's one of the two. And whichever one is not the next one is going to be the one after that. So you'll get both of them in not too long. Thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. And I'll see you back next time.